You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's story is from a man whose life was forever changed when he saw Bigfoot. Ridge shares his jaw-dropping account of the massive Sasquatch, its smooth stride, and the evidence that proves Bigfoot is more than a legend. But this story isn't about one sighting, it's about a world of strange activity unfolding in the mountains of Tennessee, from haunted distilleries to cryptids lurking in the woods. In this episode, we'll uncover a whole new side to the Bigfoot mystery, so stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Ridge today. Ridge is an individual that we got connected to. I believe it was Facebook, but he's got got an interesting encounter to share, and maybe some other stuff that's related. Let's see. Ridge owns a distillery in Tennessee, which is haunted, so that might come up as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interesting things that are coming into play here, but Ridge, welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
I'm doing great. Yep.
Absolutely. It sounds like let's start with your original Bigfoot sighting back in July of 2022 first. I'll let you start sharing that, and then we'll see where it goes after that, because I think this is all connected.
Oh, okay. Yeah, back in 2022, I've always been a believer in Bigfoot. Just never thought they were in our area. I thought they were more out in the west, out in California or Washington State, Oregon, up in that area, out in the deep woods. But in 2022, I became a knower, not just a believer. So I was working down in Georgia, down between Americus, Georgia, Plains, Georgia area. And I work for an engineering company, so I do mapping for new projects. And I was down there riding the roads, looking at what all I needed to look at and putting stuff on the computer. And I was out in the area where they grow all these trees for the paper mills to make their paper. And it's just miles and miles of trees just in straight rows. And I pulled off the side of the road, was putting some stuff on my computer there. I happened to look up, and this thing went across the road in front of me. It was the middle of July, 100-degree day, just sweltering hot day when I had the air conditioner just running wide open. It was so hot. And this thing walked across the road from one side to the other in about 6 steps. And me working with the roads and all, doing what I'm doing, I know the distance there from the center of the road to the side of the right-of-way is 33 feet on each side, so it's 66 feet. So this thing, in about 6 steps, covered that whole area, which would have made about a 9-foot stride. It takes me 22 steps to do the same distance. And so I know this was no human in a suit on a 100-degree day that did this. And so when I saw it, I put the car in gear, drove up to where I saw it cross the road at, and there was the bushes that had grown up, and there was a hole there where the game had been going through, in and out through there. And I got pictures of the area, I took GPS coordinates and everything, and tried contacting the Georgia Bigfoot people, because I believed in them. I just, I never had any close contact or anything. And so I didn't think that much about them. But then when I tried, reaching out to people, I just had people saying following, but I never did really have any people that, responded back to me. So I started doing my own research, just, looking around, finding out other people that had experiences, and getting on Facebook, on the groups and stuff. I'm a member of a lot of different groups now. And hearing all the stories from, different people and their encounters, it showed me, I wasn't crazy. And I know this creature was not a human, by the speed that it went across the road, and that it glided across the road just with a smooth gait, and like I say, in about 6 steps, it was across the road and in the woods. And so it only took, 3 or 4 seconds, where it would take us, quite a little bit more time than that, and we would be bouncing up and down trying to run. But that was my encounter there. And since then, I've been doing all this research and digging in pretty deep, and finding out more and more in our area where I live in central Tennessee up in the mountains is really, really active. I mean, I've been coming across a lot of accounts and people contacting me now, telling me about their encounters. And so we're fixing to start doing some heavy research up in that area, which some people have already been researching in our area and have seen things. So I'm getting to know them and what they've seen. But it's interesting, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can now.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about your road sighting for a little bit. I think that's very interesting. So the whole time you were having a view of its side, I would guess, as it moved across.
Yes, it just went from one side to the other, and I saw the side view. It walking across, so it was bipedal. It was solid black, middle of the day in 100 degrees South Georgia sweltering heat. It wasn't somebody in a suit, It was easy to tell. And plus, like I said, it was out where it wasn't really populated, and it was just trees, and there's deer like crazy down there. People go deer hunting down in those areas, because there's so much wildlife. And so there's plenty of food for them, plenty of shelter. It's sparsely populated, so they're out of sight, and there have been other sightings down there. I later found out in the same area.
Okay, could you get a feel as to how long the black hair was on it?
I mean, it covered the body completely, so it was had to be pretty long to cover the body completely. And like I say, the number of steps that it took, I've got a 3-foot stride on my walk, and that's how I measure things when I'm walking. And like I say, mine's 22 steps to cover that 66-foot area. So it was about a 9-foot stride on it. So it would have had to been, probably about 9 feet tall to have a stride like that. It was a lot larger than a human. And it was solid. It wasn't, skinny or anything like that. It was a pretty good sized creature.
Okay. And so it was in front of your vehicle. How close to the vehicle was it when it crossed?
It was probably, 100, 150 feet in front of me. So I got a pretty good view at it. And that's how I could, kind of see how many steps it took. And it just happened so fast. I had no time to get a camera or even think about a camera at that time. So now I have, the driving cameras on the front and the back of my work vehicle. So if something happens now, then, hopefully I'll capture it on the dash cams there.
From what you saw that day, and I know it did happen really quick, but was there anything you remember that is different than what most Bigfoot researchers will say about Bigfoot?
No, from what, I started studying and reading and have heard in the past, this one's pretty typical as far as the smoothness of the gait. It's just kind of like glided across the road. It didn't have where you're bouncing up and down, because I guess their feet are more flat. And they don't go from heel to toe like we normally do. And from all the other reports I've heard, it's pretty much a smooth gait. They don't bounce up and down. And this one was, typical what you think of Bigfoot, with the, no neck really, just large creature. And like I say, it was solid black. So this one, I have heard of some that are more like us and don't have as much hair on them. From other reports I've heard, but this one was, solid black. And I know they come in different colors, kind of like, dogs have litters, and you have different shades of colors on those. I did find out about 10 years ago that in 1997, when we lived in Alabama, my kids saw one. It's called the Alabama White Thing, Thang. It's not ing, it's ang. It's a southern thing. But Yeah, and I didn't even know about that till about 10 years ago. My wife, she knew about it, but my son, he was like 6 years old. My daughter was like 9 years old. They were over with their cousins, and they were out playing out in the yard there, and it came out of the woods, bipedal walking, and the girls ran in the house and left my son out there, and he says it was more like a Dogman creature, and it scared them, and they can recall it real vivid, from even from way back then, because that was back in '97. So they're both in their 30s now. And when I researched that one, I found out that there have been several sightings in that same area that we lived. There was 3 different counties that butted up together. And it's kind of like a triangle right there. And there was several sightings. And I know there was one other sighting back in '97 right there. So, through all my research, I've heard of all colorations of the creatures, varying degrees of hair on them. And the Dogman is something I'm just now getting into. I really never knew much about them, but that's something that's researching more and more on also.
That's really a really interesting sighting, and it definitely, you can tell it affected you, because now you're in Central Tennessee and you're doing what it sounds like you're starting active research. When you say Central Tennessee, and not to get overly specific, but is that considered the Nashville, like north of Nashville area?
It's right in between Nashville and Knoxville.
Okay.
So it's about 100 miles either way from Nashville to Knoxville, up in the upper Cumberland mountains.
Yeah.
So, we have the mountain areas. There's a lot of forest up there, a lot of state parks. My property actually butts up to a state park, and there's been a lot of sightings in there. We've had activity at our house, and we had activity back in 2018 when we had bought our property. We didn't have a house on it yet, but we would camp up there, and so we were camping one year on July 4th. And it was a 100-degree day. Wind was just really still. It was just really hot and humid. And we were packing up, getting ready to leave. And on the other hill, on the ridge there, it just started. You heard a tree just start crack, 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 and then this big old huge tree just fell over. There was no wind or anything. Something had to push it, and that was the first thing we heard there. Then my son, we had a fire going. And he went over to the edge of the hill, because it's like a 300-foot drop down to the bottom of the valley. And he just hit the tree with a stick, a few times. And there was something growled at him, and he'd come over to the fire real quick. And then in 2018, we had a camper up there when we were building our log cabin. And me and my wife were just sitting there playing cards in the camper. Wind wasn't blowing. It was, dark outside. And we heard this thing like, it sounded like somebody saying, "Hey," just really, really loud, and just sent shivers up our spine, and turned the light off and had the gun and said, "What do you want? What do you want?" And never heard anything. And we live half a mile off the main road, dead ends on our ridge back there, and we didn't really give much thought of a Bigfoot, but then recently I've got some vocalizations that have been recorded in our county, and it sounds the same as what we heard. So, I bet it was, we put a camper out there. It was something different, and they were just checking it out. And like I say, we butt up to a state park. It's nothing but trees. So
yeah,
plenty of room back there. Wild hogs and deer for them, turkeys.
Okay.
Plenty of food supply, water.
So you're very close to state park in Tennessee.
That's my backyard. I look down a big valley into the park. So, you know where that's at? Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah. Yep. I am trying to do I'm going to say, there's stuff that happens in that area. I have to be ever so careful about what I say right now. I'm trying to think of what is public and what's not. But yeah, there are things going on in that area. So there are people reaching out to you with recordings of vocals from your county?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
One of them was a researcher. He's been researching for 40 years. And he told me, he said, yeah, we're on a hunt tonight. And then it wasn't a little while later, he sent me 2 recordings, and it was, like I say, it was what I heard outside my camper, but it was long, like, like that. And then it had that guttural growl. I mean, and it was loud. I said, it sounded like you were pretty close. He said, I was in the tree and it was right below me. And he had one of those sound things, the cone things that capture the sound. Yeah. And he said he dropped that out of the tree. But I said, did it know you were there? And he said, I think it did. But he's been doing it for a long time. He's had a lot of encounters. He used to be a deputy sheriff in the county, and he was telling me about some reports of some. I'm not going to go into details because he confided in me, but this was back in 1997, and there was special ops people came in and everything. So, and he, so he doesn't reveal too much information about where he hunts or details, because we have helicopters flying over our place all the time. Sometimes they don't have any lights on at the nighttime, flying below the airspace they're supposed to be, if they're military. And we've had one lady that had one on her property. She said the helicopter actually landed out on her property and said they were buzzing her house all the time.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
It's just a lot of activity out there.
It really is. My main thing is I talk to people about Bigfoot areas all across the U.S., and there's some really interesting things happening in this area if you start to put things together. You said you've noticed Dogman activity as well?
There's been some accounts of dogmen there, just a few accounts. The main activity that I've heard of is in the LBL. It's land between the lakes there in Kentucky. And it's a big part. It's between the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River. And there's about a 5-mile stretch from one river to the other. And then it goes for probably 100 miles north and south. And most of it's all preserved land. It's park land. They have, primitive camping in some areas and some regular campsites in others. But I just found out about a report, I think it was 1982, about a dogman account or a dogman attack at one of the new campsites there. And it killed a family of 4, ripped the camper all to pieces, shredded the bodies, and they found a 5-year-old girl up in a tree. And so they never developed that park. It's just primitive camping only. They didn't want to develop that one, but from what I understand, they're all up and down through there. And the dogmen are pretty vicious, from what I understand. The Bigfoots, I'm more intrigued with them and want to build a relationship and get to where I can stand in front of one and observe them like some of the other people I've talked to that have done that. One guy, he had a family of them that he was visiting for 3 years, and there was 3 of them that would come to him, but the other ones stayed in the woods. But he would go about every day and take different things out there to him on the Bigfoots. And his story is pretty good. And he was a mayor of a county there in Tennessee, so he had to be, kind of hush hush about what was going on. He didn't want to lose his position and all that, talking about him. And then the police chief, I think, knew about him too in that county. I
think I know who you are referring to.
Yeah,
both of those gentlemen.
Yeah.
So, have you heard situations in that area where there have been very intense encounters between Bigfoot and individuals that encounter them in that area around?
I know one of the researchers, I had a meeting in February at my distillery, and we had over 90 people show up. I had no clue if anybody would even show up. I just started about the first of the year, said, I want to just have a meeting and just see if anybody has any interest in the area or has any stories, because I wanted to try to find out as much as I could, kind of pinpoint where activity may be happening. And so I made up a flyer, Tennessee Cryptids, Bigfoot and Beyond is what I called it. And I just put the date on there on a Saturday from 3 to 5. And we had over 90 people show up. And a lot of them had encounters, some of them didn't want to talk about it. Some of them did. And then there was probably that many more people that said they were wanting to come, but they had prior engagements and they weren't able to make it. So we're having another meeting coming up in 2 weeks. And I've got a guest speaker coming on that one. But I mean, I was just surprised at the outpouring of people saying, I've seen things and all that, and sharing their stories. And like I say, some of them didn't want their names used or anything like that. They told me they would tell me their stories. And one guy, he said he was hunting up in the woods several years ago and saw a Bigfoot, and it spooked him pretty good. And it was about 3 years later, he was out in the woods hunting again and saw like a giant feline. I asked him, I said, was it like a black panther? He said about 300 pounds heavier than a panther. So it would have been huge. And he said he will not go back in the woods at all now. He even moved to the big, to the city, and he does not want to go in the woods at all.
That's some wild stuff.
It could have been what they call Wampus cat.
Sure.
I've heard the name Wampus cat. I don't know if that's what he saw. I've seen pictures of him. But in my meeting, what I wanted to do is open people's minds. So there was some people there, that believe, some didn't believe really, that they were just intrigued. And I told them, I said, don't believe anything I say. I want you to research for yourself. I said, that's when you start digging and going down these rabbit holes and finding out all this information, because I could sit there and tell them stuff all day long, and they could believe me or not. And so stuff I brought out was just stuff I wanted them to research for themselves and start their own investigation and come to their own conclusions. Because I don't try to force anything on anybody. If they believe me, they believe me. If they think I'm crazy, then I'm crazy. That's the way I look at it.
I would imagine that most people in this area are probably believers, though. What do you think?
Yeah, most of them that was at the meeting were believers. And like I say, I would always believe, but in her stories, from the Alps or, other countries, other continents, and maybe a few up in Washington, but I never really knew there was that much activity all up and down the whole United States, the mountainous regions, like in the Smoky Mountains, Upper Cumberland Mountains where we're at, the Rocky Mountains, and up in Washington State and Oregon, that's where most of the forest and everything are at, and that's where they're more found at. You don't find them, like out in the deserts, because there's not any cover, not that much food. But I've really been digging into it, getting into more details.
I think some people would be surprised that some areas in the Southeast can be almost as active, which is surprising. But when you start to really dig into it, there are some areas in the Southeast that can get pretty wild. Have you had any visuals yourself in this area where you're at now?
Not in Tennessee where I'm at. Like I say, my main visual was down in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had, like I said, all these other people that have told me stuff, and I've just heard the vocalizations, and I'm all the time going out now and doing whoop, 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 down the valley and hitting the trees and trying to get responses back where I'm at, just trying to get them familiar. And we had some big storms here a while back. Everybody's been having storms here lately, but I was out picking up limbs out in the yard, and I thought I heard a radio on the other ridge because I heard a male and a female voice, but it wasn't English and it wasn't Spanish. It was I couldn't understand what they were saying, but and it kind of sounded like somebody talking on a radio or something. I thought somebody had on radio on some other language channel or whatever, but then it stopped, and I'm thinking there was what they call chatter right over the hill from where I was standing, picking up sticks and stuff, because it was loud and clear. I just couldn't understand it. And I have heard that some of the creatures respond to Native American language, because the Cherokee. I'm actually working in Cherokee, North Carolina right now on the fiber project up here, and so I've been up here since December, and there's parts of the reservation here that I'm not allowed to go on, and they keep some things hidden here. They have all kind of folklore about Bigfoots here. They call them keepers of the forest or hairy men. There's all kind of names they use for them. Down in Tennessee, where I'm from, and the South, most people call them wood boogers. The older people, before the term Bigfoot came about, they were known as wood boogers or boogeymen or things like that, because they had different names for them. But over here on the reservation, they have different names for them too. But like I said, there's areas that are general public's not allowed to go at all, and so they could be harboring them in a safe zone there or something like that. I don't know. But in January, while I was up here working, I went up on top of one of the mountains on a service road, and it was still covered with snow on the upper part. The bottom part had melted from the previous week snow. But I got up to the very top, and the road dead ended, and I turned around, and I noticed some prints in the snow on my left side. Then I got to looking on the right, and it's like it came out of the woods, went across the road and down the edge of the road, and then back down into the woods. And I got out and put my foot in the print, and it was a whole lot bigger than mine. And then a Bigfoot researcher up here, I showed him the pictures of where the prints went down the edge of the road, and he looked at them. He said, "Yeah, that's what I was wanting to see." And they were in a straight line. They weren't staggered like if we're walking and leave the prints side by side. I guess they kind of walk where they, like you'd be walking on a model runway or something, and there's one foot in front of the other.
Absolutely. 100%.
And that's what this picture was showing, and that's how it was. And like I say, these prints were large. It had snowed the week before, so there could have been some melting, and there wasn't any toe impressions because any of that snow would have melted to those, would have been thin. But they were pretty large, and but he knew what he was looking for, and me and him's actually gone down on one of the highest mountains down south of Cherokee here, and it's a federal park up there, and we were down there at 1:00 in the morning up there, just walking by the moonlight, and we had activity up there. We had tree knocks, we had whoops, and we could hear the sticks breaking, things in the woods there. And we had our thermals, cameras, and recorders and stuff. And so we got some pretty good activity up there. And he'd seen them there before. He goes a lot.
Do you feel like around your current Tennessee area that there's any communication going back of any kind between you and the creatures that are out there?
I'm trying to build up a dialogue or trust where they may respond, positively without, trying to just scare me. And so what I do is, they tell you to go and talk to the woods. So you go out there, you just talk, and if they're out there, they can hear you. I also do try to do mind speak, and just think in my mind, I'm not here to harm you. I just want to, learn about you and all that. And, and a lot of people talk about that helps. And I've also heard some people that have said that they heard in their mind, "Get out now," and so I guess if they can use speak telepathically like that, then they can warn you to get out of the area. Because some of the people I've talked to say that these are primitive human beings, or primitive people, and that they have their own language. They may have abilities that we don't have. They could be interdimensional. Heard a lot of different things, and that could be why people see them and then they don't see them. Because they're kind of interdimensional and or have the ability to cloak with the type of hair they have that's kind of clear or hollow. I've heard all kinds of different people talking about things like that. But I am trying to, like I say, build up a trust with them, and so they know that I'm not there to harm them.
Do you feel like there's been a time where you may have experienced something like that via thought or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, when I was doing the Bigfoot presentation at the distillery,
mm-hmm.
there was something that was messing with me there. I don't know if it was one of the spirits that's there at the distillery, or some Bigfoot somehow knew I was doing a meeting on Bigfoot, because about 30 minutes before the presentation, I had everything. I had all this information, pictures, and I was trying to do a slideshow and all this stuff. And my heart started racing. My mind was just jumbled up. I was trying to print stuff off the printer, off my phone, and there was no print button. The TV wouldn't connect. It's like everything was going against me on that. And, my mind was just racing, and I was able to actually get the information out. And I rewatched the video that I filmed when I did the presentation. I filmed it, and I didn't do too bad of a job, but it could have been a lot better, but something was messing with me then. And that's the first time I've ever had that particular type of experience. I've seen it on TV where, ghost hunters and stuff are going, and they get kind of confused, or they're not theirself, and that's kind of what was happening there. And, something was trying to keep me from talking about it, I think, but it could have been one of the spirits that's in the distillery. But they haven't ever messed with me like that. We know they're there, but they haven't messed with me like that.
That's extremely interesting. That's definitely something to think about, and it's hard because there's no way to know if what side that is coming from, right? But have you ever actually gone into the park itself to see if you can find evidence of Bigfoot inside the park, or is it just on the outside of it?
We've walked on some of the trails before, but I wasn't really looking at that time. There's trails all through the park, and it's public access land. So there's, you can go all around there. I work out of town a lot, so I don't have the opportunity to go into the park a lot. But like I say, I live right there on it. It starts basically at the bottom of my property. So I am in the park. And I want to get to where I can do more investigations in there, looking for, tree structures, for, prints, things like that. But I'm just not getting into that part of it. I know there's people that lead people in there and do investigations. They'll take 10 or 12 people in there and just walk around and try to look for things like that. But I haven't done those yet. But that's something we're looking at doing, kind of getting a core group out of these meetings of people that want to go do investigations and walk through the woods and do that and document stuff. And then we'll do some night hunts too. But, being out there at night, you can hear things. I've heard cars that were 4 or 5 miles away, their exhaust and watch their headlights and stuff. So it can get really quiet out there, and you can hear for, long, long ways. So, you can hear some noises out there. You say, well, I don't know what that is, but that, but like I said, I'm just now getting into that research part. I do have one that's away from Park, but is still in the county, that I've got 2 investigations to do for 2 different people, and they're within a mile and a half from each other, and neither one of them, I haven't told them who they are. I just told them that they had some neighbors that had activity also, because I'm not going to reveal who the other people are to them, for their privacy. But one lady has had a lot of activity on her property. She's actually going to sell her property because it scared her so bad. The other one, just the other night, posted Bigfoot howling in the background that sounded just like the one that I've heard. And then I got to talk to the landowner on that one after I saw the video, and he told me they've been having activity for about 2 years on there. And those are killing some of the livestock, and at the one lady's house, they're banging on the house, and she's seen the mother and the juveniles, and she's got scared to death by the big guy one time when she went smoked on her deck. Went out there and leaned over the deck at night and looked over, and there he was. And she was just in tears when she was talking to me about it. So I'm going to go over there and investigate those during the daytime and look for evidence, prints and tree structures, and look at the pile of bones. She said she picked up like 15 goat skulls, and there's just piles of bones where they'd been sitting there eating them in the farms like a mile away where the goats are from. So.
Wow, and that's in that same area of central Tennessee where you're at.
Yes, still in the Cumberland Mountains. Yeah, that's probably about 30 miles from. And a lot of people say that they kind of travel around. They may not stay in the same area all the time, but there's different families of them, different units of the the family structures there. So they may stay in one area for a while and then they move. But there's so much land there. You got the rivers, you got the lakes, and all the woods. There's plenty of room for cover, and isolation. And then, I'm hearing all these stories from, the past where people talk about your grandma and grandpa and all, and, talking about them. And there's even places up there like Booger Ridge, Brimstone Booger, things like that, where there was creatures in different areas, and they always name them whatever that area is, and they'll call them Booger. And so that's how all these roads and trails and areas got their name, is because of creatures that were sighted, years and years ago. And actually, have you heard the account of Daniel Boone killing Bigfoot?
Oh yeah, was it Yahoo or Wahoo or something like that?
Yeah, they called them Yahoos back then, because that was a character in one of the books that was out at the time. But that was up in Boonesboro, Kentucky, north of us, but it's still in the same mountain range. But he actually had a camp about 5 miles from my house along the Cumberland River back in the 1700s. He was like the first white settler up through there. He's named a lot of the rivers, a lot of the areas and all that. And there's still a lot of Boones that are living in the area that are descendants of his. But he spent about 2 years there right close to my house. But like I said, it was later that he actually killed that Bigfoot that was trying to kill his son. And I think they measured it out to like 9 or 10 feet, according to the story there. And so, and Davy Crockett also had an encounter. I don't know if it was in that area or not, but and apparently the story was told to a group up in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I think that's where the term Sasquatch kind of came about, the Sasquatch monster, and from Saskatchewan, Canada. That's one story I've heard.
From people that you talk to in your area, do they usually describe the Bigfoot down there as looking like either an ape or more human-like, or is it kind of back and forth across the board?
There was one lady that wrote a book called 50 Years with Bigfoot. Her name was Mary Green. She lived about 10 miles from where I live. And she was kind of the Bigfoot lady, they called her in that area. And she wrote this account of a family that had Bigfoots living on the property for over 50 years. And in that account, they observed them, having young ones and them growing up, and the different generations. And they said some would travel through occasionally for a couple months and then be gone. I don't know if they were picking up new, different mates or something like that. And in that story, there was variations of coloration, the amount of hair on their body. Like I said, some of them, from the way they described it, looked like the thing on Lord of the Rings or whatever, that little squiggly guy, whatever his name is, I don't know, but so they had very little hair, but they were still like a wild man, and had more human features versus the ape features. One lady that was at our meeting, she had a picture that she had a professional draw of what she saw at her house, and it was typical Bigfoot, no neck, real broad shoulders and muscular arms and legs, and hairy. And she was about 10 feet from that one. When she went to feed the animals, had to plate of food and looked up, and there it was. She said it was about 10 foot tall, and she started gifting that one, and it stayed around for a while. But I talked to her the other day, and she said she hasn't seen activity for a little while because she was leaving food out there for it, marbles, things like that. Not everybody's scared of them, they're intrigued by them. Some of them people are, and a lot of people won't talk about them because they may have them on their property and they don't want anything to happen to them. They're trying to protect them. So, some people will talk about them. Some people know about them, but they won't, because sometimes there's several farms in the area that know about them, and some of them people may be losing livestock or something, but they don't go out there trying to kill them or whatever.
I actually always wondered that, because if you look on the map about this area, there's some pretty big farms. And so have you actually talked to these farmers that are having to pretty much just deal with them, but they're just trying to keep their livestock good?
Yeah, I've talked to some of them. I've actually gone out and done investigations on one guy's property that he showed me a picture of a big print that was on his property. We went and did some investigations with the dowsing rods or the witching rods. Found some buried stuff. I'm not going to get in detail about that, but there are some things on the property that are buried and have monolithic stones on them. So I don't know if it's like Indian burial sites or something like that. But we were using the dowsing rods trying to find them, and we found what we were looking for. We walked all around the rest of the property, and they didn't do anything. And then I mentioned that some of the ghost hunters use them when there's energy around, they'll cross. And my dowsing rods crossed, and I said, "Look over here," and he said, "Look over here," and his was doing the same thing. And I backed up, went back over that spot. It didn't do it. I said, "Can you do that again?" And it did it. And our metal detectors started going crazy, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of energy there, and that big footprint was right there in that area that we were at. And he's smelt them in there a couple of times, and they had seen them before out in Texas when they lived there. But they've also had, ghost activities on that property also. So it was a pretty active area out there. Another thing about that area is it's a crater impact. It's called the, how's it called, blank, Flynn Lick crater. and there was a meteor millions of years ago that hit, and it's one of six in the United States. And you can't really tell that it's a meteor impact, except, it's got some mountains around it and all, but just looking at it, you wouldn't even be able to tell. But that's, it's because it's a big, huge crater. And that, when a meteor hits like that, it creates a lot of energy. And just like up at the Serpent Mound, I believe in Ohio, that one's on a crater impact, and there's so much energy around that. And I'm thinking that could be one reason there's a lot of energy and a lot of sightings and things like that in our area. It's because of the impact crater, maybe.
That's really interesting to think about. I don't think that's ever come up on the show before. So that is a very cool other hypothesis to look into. But I think you'd mentioned before the show, you've also had interactions with aliens in this area too.
Yes. Personally, I've seen 3 different craft through my lifetime. I've had first time was when I was 18 and 17, 18 years old when I was still in high school, and that was down in Alabama. We observed that one for about 30 minutes, thought it was like a weather balloon because it was just a big silver orb in the sky, and it was about 5 or 6 miles away. And we just observed it, and I went home, got the binoculars, and we were looking at it through the binoculars. And then all of a sudden it just kind of took off and got out of there pretty quick. And then I saw another one back probably about 2018 or so when I was traveling from Minneapolis up to North Dakota when I was working up there. And I saw about a 25-foot orb outside the airplane go from one cloud to the other and just stop. And then the last one I saw was a couple of years ago. A craft came over the house. It was low and slow, and it was big. And it was more like a TR-3B craft, if you're familiar with those, triangle craft.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it had the back of it was just red all the way, across it, kind of like a Dodge Charger taillights, how they go, just red all the way across or whatever. And so this thing, it was, thick, but it was flat, and it was going pretty slow, for a craft. And it wasn't really that high up off the ground. But we see stuff all the time in the sky. We'll sit out there and look up in the sky and see. Of course, we see the space station come by. We see the Starlink, but there's other things up there that aren't human, and they're tiny dots and they're moving super fast. And then we have seen. I saw one that was above the river. As I was coming home one night, with the road follows the river, and I saw something that looked like it was a couple 100 feet off the river, big bright light out there. When I got home, I was talking to the family about it because they were outside, by the campfire, and then we saw this thing in the distance come up above the trees and went up and stopped, and then it went back down later. I don't know what that was. I have seen another thing come out of the sky during a meteor shower. They were saying there was a meteor shower, so we were outside looking at that, and it came dropping down towards the horizon and stopped, separated in like 5 different lights, and then just kind of went horizontally different directions. So, I've seen things like that I don't know what those are, but the orbs I saw up pretty close, and the other craft came over. And we have a psychic lady that lives down the road, and she reported, or she told us that she saw a large craft hovering over a field down there, and her husband couldn't see it, but she did. And we have these people that are down there summoning aliens, and she didn't know that. That was hovering over that same field. So, there's activity out there.
So you've got people in the same area that are summoning aliens?
Yeah. They did that for a couple of years. They haven't been back, but their equipment and everything was down there. There was a recent flood, and they brought in some of these tiny houses. They had those there. They had a Humvee there. They had a couple of vehicles, and a lot of this stuff just got washed down into the neighbors' yard down there. They had storage containers. But I came through one night coming in from work, and it was like 3 a.m. And they had that whole field lit up, different colors, and everything. I don't know what all they were doing, but they were actually, and they do this in different locations too. It wasn't just that one. So they bought that 10 acres, did all this work to it, and then they kind of abandoned it unless they got picked up. I don't know. I haven't seen them in a couple of years. But they had those people said they had other locations that they would go do the same type of thing at.
That is absolutely wild.
Didn't know anything about it. But she said she saw the craft up there.
Oh my goodness. Crazy stuff. That's, not my forte, but it is still interesting and, man, wild to think that people are, well, I guess I do know a little bit about that because isn't there like, what is it? It's like a protocol that people do. It's escaping my mind right now, but someone will probably put it in the comments. But you've got some wild stuff going on in this area, Ridge. My goodness, and it sounds like you're really just getting started with it.
And it was about 5 years ago when I was in for July 4th weekend from out of town. That's when I was working up in North Dakota. And I woke up and the whole room in our cabin was just lit up really, really bright. We didn't have no light source at all on that side of the cabin. The only other light we have on the outside is a single light bulb in the front. But the whole room was just lit up really, really bright. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything. And it was like a vortex, like my eyes, it was like spinning around. And then the light, when it finally went out, then I was just sitting there just shaking. And so I don't know if I was abducted at that point or just visited or something. And my wife, she's there by herself a lot of times when I'm gone, and she's seen the light too, but she just said she puts cover over her head and she doesn't want to think about it.
Okay.
I was actually frozen. I couldn't move. Of course, my wife, she's a medium. She sees dead people and stuff. So we're kind of used to odd stuff happening and seeing things. So, we've been married 40 years and she's been seeing dead people ever since I've known her. So, and she's learning how to use her abilities a little more too also. So.
Okay. So that makes sense how you would know the distillery is haunted then. Yeah.
Yes. So and we do ghost hunts there. We do a private label for the ghost hunt weekend people that are on Travel Channel and YouTube, and the Wraith Chasers. You may have seen them on Travel Channel. They've all been down there, and so we've done like 3 different hunts at different times there, on the weekends. And then we've had other mediums that come in, people that are just, coming in, don't know anything about the distillery or the other ghost hunt group or anything. And they'll see the same people that we know are there. And they'll describe them and we say, yep, and we know who they are. And we have store cameras in there. We pick up stuff on our store cameras. The bottles get moved around. We hear our names. We hear whistling. Sometimes it'll sound like boxes falling over and there's nothing moved. The building was built in 1898, and it was a livery stable to begin with for the hotel across the street because we're right downtown in Gainesboro, Tennessee. And then later it became a car dealership, a Ford car dealership, up until 1980. And so the person that ran the livery stable, the blacksmith, that's where they kept all the horses and buggies for the guests at the hotel. He became the lead mechanic and worked there 62 years at the distiller at the Ford dealership. And so his family come in, was talking to us about that. And so at the next ghost hunt, we were talking about him, saying he may still be around since he spent so much time there. And on one of the phones, it said blacksmith, and then it said Vincent, which it was Vincent Ford when it closed in 1980. So that was affirmation that he was there. And one of the other people that's there is Major Jim Quarles that used to own the building, and he was a car dealer or a car salesman. also. And our cash register is right where his desk sat, we found out. And we have a lot of activity there. The spirit balls go off a lot there. And there's another lady that's from the 1800s, Aunt Polly, she's known as, and she managed a couple of the hotels there. Real prominent woman in town, and she's there a lot. We've communicated with her, and people describe her, at these different events, or people that just come in, they see him, they see her. There's a child in there that we don't know who that is either. But some of the mediums have said that the child was jumping down off the rafters to the floor and back up, back and forth, wanting to play with their child that was with them. So, it's pretty active there.
And so you definitely have your hands full wherever you go, which is pretty incredible. But the whole area is definitely wild with Bigfoot activity. But I just want to say, thank you for sharing a little bit about what you've been experiencing in this area of Tennessee, Ridge. Thank you for coming on the show. Is there a way that people can reach out to you in any way if they have maybe something they heard during this episode sounds like something they've got going on their property?
Yeah, if they want to just, they can email me on my personal email. I don't mind that. I don't want to do it on my business email, but I'll give you my personal one out. And I go by Ridge because I used to be a ridge runner. I used to haul illegal moonshine. And now I'm a ridge walker, so I walk in the mountains and stuff, looking for Bigfoots and other things that are out there. So that's why I go by Ridge. My email is SEHUNT, the number 1 at yahoo.com.
Great. That's awesome.
I can give out my phone number if they want to.
I mean, text that's me, that's totally up to you. I might recommend just the email. Yeah, this podcast has reach.
I get so many car warranty calls and all that kind of stuff too. So
me too.
A lot of times I don't answer numbers that aren't noticed that I don't know. So, but but I'm just, like I say, there's so much activity in the paranormal. I'm just learning more and more about all of it, and you just have to be open to it, for it to happen. Really, I mean, it can be happening, and you're not really seeing it, you're not feeling it because you're not open to it. But once you do open up to it, then the connection can be made there. The one thing I was going to talk about interdimensional that I always tell people is, I stay in hotels a lot when I work out of town. So, you can have, say a 4-story hotel there, and in the same footprint of that 4-story hotel or that room, you've got different dimensions. You're on different floors, different things going on, but you're still covering that same footprint. And I think, like ghosts are in their own dimension. Like Major Quarles could still be in our building selling cars in his own dimension, and sometimes they just overlap. That's why we hear them; they hear us. The Bigfoots could be interdimensional and move in and out of dimensions, and they can be in a person only sees from one range on the high side and down to the low side, where dogs and cats see a lot more than we do and hear more. And it could be that some of these creatures are just on that verge of where we can actually see, and they can go in and out really easily. Because there could be something right beside us, and if we're not able to perceive it, we don't see it. But it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that we don't have the ability to see it. Just like a thermal camera, you can look with your naked eye and not see anything. You look at a thermal camera and it shows something there. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
That's extremely interesting. Wow. Wild stuff, Ridge. Thank you. We're definitely have to keep in touch. You just, it feels like you're starting to get into some wild Bigfoot stuff down there, and you're in the area where you have access to a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, the guy up here in North Carolina that I went Bigfoot hunting with. He's a Bigfoot expert down here. He mentioned in Tennessee. I said, well, that's where I live. He said, really? He said, I've been down there 6 times doing hunts down there. So, yeah, if you want to come down and do a hunt or something sometime, and, like I say, I'm right there. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I got a few things to talk to you afterwards, but I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the show. Ridge, it has been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invite.
Just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Ridge's story is a powerful reminder of how one encounter can shift your entire perspective. From his close encounter in Georgia to his ongoing research in the mysterious mountains of Tennessee, Ridge is uncovering more than just Bigfoot sightings. He's peeling back the layers of something much bigger. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to us on YouTube and hit the bell icon so you don't miss an episode, and share this episode with a friend who's fascinated by Bigfoot, the paranormal, or unexplained mysteries. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you're following the show, and if you'd be willing to leave a review, it really helps more folks find us. Now, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot encounter, especially around Tennessee, I'd love to hear from you. So please shoot me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com and let's talk. Also, don't forget Sasquatch Summerfest is coming up July 11th through the 12th in Oak Ridge, Oregon. Bigfoot Society listeners can grab a 2-day pass for the price of 1-day admission with code BFS at checkout. So huge thanks to Priscilla for making that happen. Tickets are available now at www.sasquatchsummerfest.com. Thanks again for being part of the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there. And see you in the woods.